So, hello everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Yes She Can project. I'm so happy today to be joined by the gorgeous Marie. Hello, Marie,
Hello, Michelle. Thanks for having me today.
and thank you for coming. So, bit of behind the scenes. We've attempted this yesterday, but the Wi-Fi was not being our friend, was it? So
It was
we've
not,
come back
no.
the day later.
Yeah, sometimes it's not meant to be. And yeah, I think hopefully today would work really well. So yeah.
Exactly. Let's smash through it today and let's see what we can do. So just if you could do a little quick introduction for me, just to tell the listeners a bit about who you are and what you do, please.
Yeah. So hi everyone. Really happy to be here. Thanks, Michelle. So my name is Marie Morice. I'm a clinical sexologist and sex coach. What it actually means in the sort of layman's terms is that I am sort of helping women and men as well to kind of reconnect with the sexual selves, looking at sort of any issues that are linked to their sexuality. I don't do any body work, so it's all about sort of talk base and really kind of getting people to help with the goals they might have in that space and achieving them. So very much like a coach. If you think about a sports coach, thinking when you approach one because you want to be able to run a marathon in a year of time, you're going to get someone who's going to help you with that. So very, very much in that way, but focusing on sex.
Okie doke. So you do have an extensive career, Marie, in the corporate world, spanning 25 years in actual fact. So you've had quite an interesting journey up until this point. But you recently, in the past, would you say it's the past year or so that you decided to kind of focus fully on the role that you're doing at the moment?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's all linked to sexual wellness. So I did spend 25 years working in sustainability, mostly sustainable finance,
Okay.
engaging with large corporates. And the whole idea was to help channeling finance and so financing of the sustainable development goals. So basically looking at where sort of the planet wanted to be in sort of 10 years time and helping channeling that the finance towards that. It was
Okay.
very exciting, very rewarding. In fact, my last role was at the UN, where I was leading, sort of project and an initiative around that specifically. But it felt quite global, very global, in fact. And I didn't feel like I had this one-to-one impact that can be driven by conversations such as the one we're having today or others.
Yeah.
So I retrained initially as a life coach as
Right.
part of the International Coaching Federation. And a lot of the clients I was working with at the time, that was 2 or 3 years ago, while still working at the UN, were
Okay.
actually asking me more and more questions around intimacy, around relationship, around I'm coming out of a long-term marriage, what it actually means for me sexually, and so on and so forth, and or I want to date again. I have no idea how to do that, and so I
Mhm.
felt. I was able to answer partly some of their questions, but not sort of necessarily as an expert. So then I subsequently sort of trained for 18 months at a master level sort of program called Sex Coach Sex Coach University, which is online, where we did 750 hours of training. So
Wow.
subsequently, it's an investment of time and of course a bit of money as well. But it really kind of got me trained on sort of all matters related to sexuality and sexual wellness, and that's where I am today. So that's really sort of the bridging and
Yeah.
feeling like I wanted to continue sort of working in a corporate space. We'll come back to that, but also having those one-to-one conversations and really helping people where I could.
Amazing. Well, there's lots, I would say, because of the work that you're doing now, there is actually a lot of it that ties in with some of the issues that you were tackling through your time in the corporate world anyway. I know you say it so casually, oh, when I worked at the UN, that's massive.
Yeah, it's big, but nothing is big enough for I think for people to feel like they are in their ivory tower and not actually sort of being human day to day. So
Yeah,
it was a big job, but it was also quite frustrating because it was focusing on things that were not as tangible, really
right.
helping incorporate reducing their environmental and social impacts, which I think is great. But my whole lens has kind of changed. So it's a similar, as you said, it's not dissimilar, but it's looking at how can people actually sort of, think about their wellness in the more holistic, sort of way,
Yeah.
which does include, and that's really my conviction, or my belief that it does include our sexual wellness.
Yeah.
And so, looking at mental wellness, how it impacts, sort of all sorts of other sort of aspects of your life, including how that kind of, precludes and has an impact at work. Because I
Okay.
really do think that, there are sort of, bridges between the two. So it's about the broader sort of, wellness kind of agenda at the corporate level, which I'm working on as well.
Yeah, definitely, because there is different pillars in your current business, isn't there, Marie? So you work with people on a one-to-one basis, like
Yeah.
private clients, then you will go into corporate organizations, and you actually offer programs for the employers to be able to, be tackling topics and be aware of the topics that are important, specifically for women's health at the moment. What kind of ways could you explain just a little bit more about the different ways in which you work?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's a really good summary. So yes, I have three pillars, sort of one-to-one, which is my private practice, and then with corporates, and I also, third pillar is looking at climate change and doing speaking opportunities around that. But
Mhm.
on the corporate side, that's really where I want to focus. I spent 25 years, sort of in the corporate world, so I understand very well what it actually means to think about your employees from a wellness perspective. I think, sort of often it's not something that's been looked at as much.
Yeah,
And yeah, I mean, so health, in particular, women's health, is booming in terms of thinking about, sort of menopause is a big
yeah,
one, menstruation, sort of all different sort of life cycles, episodes that women are going to go through that are absolutely not, sort of anything to be ashamed of, but might not be
mhm,
talked about because it's just been such a taboo. And so the
yeah,
way I work with employers, whether they are large or smaller, is to engage. So it could be, for example, as a lunch and learn session where you have
yeah,
sort of 90 minutes where I come in to a room of 50, 60 people who are there to actually sort of, ask any questions they might have around the menopause in particular. Or it could be a training program. So that might be a bit, sort of longer where we actually sort of go around and train, if you like,
yeah,
managers who will sort of either are women themselves or manage women, sort of, and want to know how to best do that. Or it could be even a longer program. And I think there's a real emphasis on what the role of the private sector can have in advancing sexual health and reproductive health at work. So
yeah.
that also includes, for example, people who need to have, sort of fertility treatment and take leave around that. So it's really looking at all aspects of our sexual and reproductive health.
Yeah. Would you say that you noticed, Marie, when you were in that sector yourself, did you notice certain gaps? And is that why you want to be the one to fill them now with the work that you're doing?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's hard enough for, we talk about gender equality, and in
Mhm.
fact, it's one of the UN Sustainable Development Goals, number 5. It's all about gender equality. I think it's brilliant to have that there. But it's a double issue for women.
Yeah,
If you're there, really trying to make a difference, going up and becoming a leader, and so on and so forth. And then on the other hand, either people of your team or yourself are experiencing, for example, menopause symptoms or
yeah,
other sort of, sexual and reproductive health symptoms. It's not something that you might be able to kind of talk about. So not only is hard
definitely.
enough with the pay gap, it's hard enough with the, sort of various situations that we know, sort of it's not yet equal. I think there's a 24% sort of, pay gap between the man and woman for exactly the same
Wow.
job and qualification. So, and that's in the UK. On top of that, it really feels like exactly what you said, Michelle. There's this gap around, sort of equality around our sexual and reproductive health, and being able to talk about it. Up to 25% of women actually either consider or leave, the job as a result of the menopause or experiencing menopause symptoms. So it's
Wow.
big, has a
Mhm.
big impact, in terms of the business case and the case for well, the actual business. And that's something I want to talk more about.
So will you be in obviously for 2025 and beyond in your work, will you be targeting the employers, or will you be doing workshops for the employees, or maybe a mixture of both?
I think a mixture of both, especially because menopause, I keep banging about menopause, but it is sort of one of the key aspects of the work that I do, especially because myself, it's my kind of definitely my demographics. I did go through menopause recently. I think there's sort of space to work both with employers and employees. So employers really around sort of, shaping the policies that needs to kind of be
Yeah.
in place more and more. In fact, I expect with this new government, it's going to be mandatory to actually have those policies in place. But
Okay.
beyond the policy, what is it that, sort of how do you actually train your leaders to integrate those aspects during sort of, work, but
Yeah.
also making sure that employees have the information that they need to have access to. So for sure, both aspects will be the focus for 2025.
Definitely. And I think also the fact that someone like you, with your wealth of experience, is going in there and opening the conversation, I think will be comforting to so many people, because I think that is sometimes, especially in corporate organizations, it's the fear of starting the conversation for either A, how you'll be perceived, or B, whether or not you're kind of on shaky ground. Because if your job is obviously your livelihood, which is what everybody's is, it's very difficult to kind of, if you don't feel comfortable enough to be having these conversations, then it's very difficult to do so. But I think that that's why what you're doing by going in and kind of being the spokesperson at the head of the table, if you like, is really important for you to kind of, like I say, be opening up the conversation for people to feel safe.
Yeah, it's feeling safe and destigmatizing, all those
Mhm.
conversations. I remember when I started thinking about this is what I want to do, being at a board meeting with a lot of men in the room, and actually not blaming any men. It's just that they happened to be quite a male environment where I was working in, and having a very heavy periods and wearing obviously a white dress
Mhm.
around that time, not having plans at all that it would be happening that day, and feeling really uncomfortable to that was way before I was training, to even raise the issue. And then at some point I was like, well, I'm going to have to go to loo and just change and everything. So
Mhm.
I interrupted the meeting and said, I'm really sorry, but I'm going to have to go. And those conversations, where you can't even focus on the conversation anymore, because what
Yeah.
you're focusing on is, oh my god, I'm gonna have sort of blood everywhere, and it's
Yeah.
gonna be very embarrassing and so on. So if some men in that room were able to kind of understand what was going on, it would be a lot
Yeah.
easier to have those conversations. That's just an example, but there are many, and I know a lot of my friends and colleagues or ex-colleagues have had similar situations.
Yeah, definitely. It's just the about raising awareness, isn't it? And it is about having the conversations at the forefront of people's mind, and kind of encouraging other people to ask questions, not just the ones that are specifically maybe suffering some of the symptoms, like you say, of menopause or their periods or whatever that might be. It's a case of other people potentially noticing the signs and symptoms
Yeah.
because they've had that education from somebody like you in the workplace anyway.
Yeah. Exactly, and it could be really small things like, for example, installing a little fan on people's desk or having it
Oh my God,
available if you're
yes.
suffering from hot flushes, for
Mhm.
example. So little things. It doesn't have to be over-engineered. It's just more about exactly creating an environment that makes it comfortable for people to say, "I'm having a hot flush. Can you just give me 1 minute?"
Yeah,
And then that's okay. There's absolutely no stigma attached to that. It's not, no one's actually willing to experience that, but it just happens. So we need to kind
yeah.
of be aware of it.
Well, I mean, how do you think, Marie, like, because the way that things have gone in the last couple of years, menopause is a topic that a lot of people are trying to start talking about.
Yeah.
What have you noticed, obviously, with you working with the UN and everything? Have you noticed any trends that has started that conversation? Do you know why maybe people have started talking about it?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of, sort of a couple of things. One is that midlife is definitely less, sort of stigmatized as something that is the end of our or some kind of expiry date, where women,
Yeah,
sort of after that, basically is to switch between reproductive sex to recreational sex, where you actually, and this is what I work on, in my private practice, where women are more aware that there's a whole life, sort of ahead, or a second life ahead of them. Actually, menopause in Japanese is called second spring. I
Is
really like
it?
that, because there's
Oh,
something about, it's not the end, it's just the second sort of, time that you can experience, sort of many different things, including sort of potentially, a very fulfilling sex life. Obviously, that's not the angle I'm going to take necessarily with corporates, but I
mhm.
think a combination of that, sort of in the broader awareness that we have collectively, plus a lot of celebrities, including Davina McCall, really
Yeah.
raising, sort of the game in that space. And from a UN perspective, interestingly, not just specifically on menopause, but even the UN Sustainable Development Goals #3 is all about well-being, wellness. And
Mhm.
so that's mapping out, how the world could look like in sort of by 2030. And so that does include sexual health and access to reproductive health and so on. So I think, there's many different elements, celebrities, broader awareness, as well as some roadmaps like the UN, which is quite universal and inspiring some businesses to work on this.
Wow, incredible. And am I right in thinking that a lot of corporates have, obviously, that they've got their, their DEI targets that they have to meet. Do they also have women's health targets that they have to meet too, which would allow, obviously, women like you to go in and be able to deliver these kind of educational things for them?
Yeah, so it's really interesting. I think in the UK, it's going to start to become mandatory, for at least
Right.
for large corporates to have policies in place. But we all well know that sometimes, I mean, it's a great start to have those policies, but then you need to
Mhm.
transform policies to actual practice and what happens, sort of
Yes.
day to day. So it's not just sitting there on the shelf for saying, oh, we've got a shiny policy, but
We've
actually,
ticked the box
yeah,
almost.
ticking the box, exactly. A bit like, same thing with carbon and climate and many different other environmental and social KPIs. So I think the frameworks are there. What is going to now matter is whether and how companies are actually thinking about implementing programs that do sort of properly support women on that journey. So that's going to be the advancement of the private sector. And of course, some are going to be leading, some are going to be lagging. That's always the case for any topics they work on. Interestingly, the UN, there's an agency called UNFPA. So the UN works with different agencies, a bit like a government. You have an agency working specifically focusing on children's health, another on women's health. The one that I have been involved with is actually sort of issued a guide called The Role of the Private Sector to Advance SRHR, which is Sexual and Reproductive Health and Rights. And they are looking at sort of, potential indicators for companies to think about when they are implementing those policies. But they're really insisting on the fact that it's not just about the policies; it has to be about the actual program and
Yeah.
the
The
implementation of it.
action taking, isn't
Yeah,
it?
yeah, because that's the thing. It's like if I know I work for a company that has this policy, brilliant. But if I still can't manage my hot flushes, or I'm going to be laughed at by my colleague if I'm a bit, sort of actually sweaty in my
Yeah.
in my neck, or if they're going to sort of make fun of me because I have my periods, or stuff. I mean,
Mhm.
I don't think it's the making fun necessarily, but it's more like I feel embarrassed and uncomfortable to talk about this,
Yeah.
or I can't talk to my manager about it, and it's actually impacting my performance at work, and
Mhm.
that's a big one. So being able to raise it, in a way that is destigmatizes what I want to focus on.
Definitely, and I think it's going to improve the statistics currently as well, with like you saying the amount of women and the percentage of women that are either missing periods of work or having to leave their
Yeah.
jobs as a result of not feeling, seen and heard. I think it's the work that you're doing is incredible when it comes to, you're trying to change the future.
Yeah, and it's bad enough for a lot of women to, with childcare and many other things that they
Yeah,
have to kind of juggle with. So you add on this, and that's a massive issue, for employers. And
yeah,
it's obviously partly it's no one's fault, no one's responsibility in that sense, but I think it is something for employers to think about in terms of really providing the space and environment for women to feel they can keep thriving even when they are, sort of in those years, without stigma and without feeling like they should be ashamed of it. So it is a business issue in that sense. It is about retention, it's about attraction, and it's about keeping your talent, sort of, and
yeah.
also making other managers, even if they are male, aware of it. Interestingly, when I did the lunch and learn session recently,
Yeah.
half of the room was, sort of male, the other was female. So it was brilliant to have that mix.
Okay.
And not everyone obviously was comfortable asking questions necessarily in front of a group. But I had a few emails afterwards of men saying, sort of giving me really positive feedback and also asking about their own personal relationship, sort of at home
Wow.
with their spouse and things that were going
Mhm.
on, around sort of, being midlife and so on. So that's the other thing, is really opening those conversations that might be a bit more private or more intimate that they might not want to bring at work. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, that's why having
And
the two hats really work well.
definitely, and then that kind of feeds into being able to work with you on a one-to-one basis, because the fact is you've opened up the conversation that some people may not feel like they can have, which means that then you build the trust with people, and then kind of they come on the journey with you on a one-to-one basis too.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And the one thing is, I can explain until I'm blue in the face what a sexologist does and so on. It's really for people to say, oh, this is what she does. It kind of, it needs to have the penny dropped and the trust there as well, because there are intimate conversations and not everyone is necessarily comfortable to have those. So
Mhm.
what I want to do is, in my one-to-one, is kind of really create that space for people to feel they can ask any questions related to sexuality, their sexuality, and that includes menopause or sex during menopause or libido, all sorts of things. I was joking
Yeah.
about it in the lunch and learn, saying I'm not going to talk about libido, and of course the whole room laughed because people understand what we actually mean. But if people want to continue those conversations, they can in an environment and a container that will hold for them
Mhm.
safely and confidentially as well, of course. Yeah.
Definitely. And Marie, as I touched on before, that the past year for you has been pretty epic, to be honest. I mean,
Yeah.
you've been featured regularly in the media. Let me have my list here. So, in some of the country's leading titles like the Daily Mail, Hello Magazine, Metro, British Vogue, The Times, Top Sante, it's so clear that the sheer amount of media interest that you've had shows that these conversations are so important to be having. Do you think that is the reason why you've had so much success so far? Because these are the conversations that people want to be having and need to be having at the moment.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's interesting because when I first started this year, and I think you gave me the advice saying, you could either go in and you're an amazing coach, yourself. You could either go in and sell your story, or you could position yourself as an expert. And
Mhm.
I think those headlines are not about my sex life. Just to be completely clear, they really are about the expertise that I'm bringing to the room, or at least the newsroom, on
Yeah.
those topics. So I'm there as a guide. I'm there in the background. uh, I really want to kind of provide the space to have those conversations, exactly, to open them and also to kind of keep them going, because it's a bit like a little fire, right? It needs to be lit and then just to kind of go and spread. So it's about creating these movements of sexual wellness, awareness of it, education, advocacy, and really stuff, I think it is resonating right now, and not just isolating menopause as just a one-off. It's talking about the whole broad, sort of spectrum of other things that we need to talk about and bring to the table, in terms of real world experience. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And you do a lot of speaking as well, don't you, Marie? Like what kind of topics do you do your speaking events on?
Yeah, so I've got three really topics that I kind of come back to, which are really important to me right now. One is female pleasure, and that's really sort of linked to my private practice. So obviously it depends on the setup. I don't talk to female pleasure about anyone, although that would be my dream, but it might happen one day. But female pleasure, in the sense that again, something that is more and more emerging, but really sort of putting it on par with male pleasure. Again, not about men bashing, but really recognizing that women need clitoral stimulation to climax and orgasm, and that's something that sort of we need to think about when we talk about intercourse, because that doesn't always happen. So it's thinking about this pleasure gap that really is the difference between women not having as many orgasms, another gap, as men. So that's back to equality. So that's something I will talk about. The other is very much what we've just discussed on this podcast around the importance of corporate wellness,
Yeah.
linking it to sort of, creating this sort of space for women and men as well to bring up those topics, without sort of stigma, and really sort of, creating a culture of inclusion, as you said, diversity, and making sure that, women feel kind of comfortable in the workspace. And then the third topic, which is another, I guess, sort of a legacy of my previous work on climate, is making the link between climate and the impact it's having on women's sort of particularly sexual health and reproductive health, which is mind blowing as well. So those
Yeah.
are the three kind of topics that I favor in my talks.
Amazing. So just with the last one there, I remember we had a conversation a few months ago, didn't we?
Yeah.
And the fact that it correlates so much with your previous work, obviously in sustainability and climate issues. Can you just tell the listeners a little bit about the conversation that we had? Because it blew my mind.
Yeah, and it's not often necessarily a link that, by the way, I was making myself at the time. It took me
Mhm.
a while to get there. So, and there's a great report about it if you want to read more about it. But the best way is probably to illustrate it with an example on what's happening, for example, in Bangladesh.
Yeah.
So the climate change has, sort of direct impact on sea level rises. So that's something that, because Bangladesh is a relatively flat country, at least, sort of in the flooding plains, sea level is actually sort of rising every year, which makes less and less lands actually sort of cultivatable. So that means, sort of
Yeah.
lands is no longer accessible for farmers to kind of grow vegetables and take a revenue from it. And so what we see actually happening, there's a trend which is actually sort of, pretty horrible, impacting girls directly, because those farmers don't have any other means, and sort of, the other assets, if you like, during in the families actually could be their girls. And so girls are getting married even younger than they used to. And
Mhm.
that, sort of has a direct impact on obviously the sexual health of those girls, sometimes married at the age of 9 or 10. You can well imagine, they're not at all in their years of reproductive years, and that has massive
Yeah.
impacts and on their overall health. So that is a link that I want to work on more. There's
Mhm.
sadly a lot of example, another one is women actually having to kind of, with water shortages, having to walk even further out to kind of fetch water, and sometimes, or often being at risks of sexual assault, as a result.
Yeah.
So there is a direct link beyond the kind of broader link to our broader health,
Mhm.
specifically around sexual and reproductive health for women, that is linked to climate change, unfortunately.
It's unbelievable, and you just you wouldn't think that the two would correlate at all.
No, because one is very much seen as the environment, carbon, sort of
Mhm.
polar bears, if you think of climate change, sort
Yeah.
of warming and so on. And we know of health impacts like, for example, in an increase of mosquito and, sort of other diseases. Of course,
Yeah.
that's definitely one thing that we've talked about before, or has been talked about before. But this particular link on women's health, especially sort of, sexual and reproductive health, is something that I think needs to be talked about a lot more, because it's not on
Definitely.
everyone's radar.
Definitely, absolutely. So Marie, as we touched upon earlier as well, like this year for you, you've absolutely been completely flying. I've literally sat back and been like, oh my goodness, it's been incredible. Do you have a chance to regularly kind of just sit back and pause and reflect on just how far you've come in such a short space of time?
Yeah, I have actually, interestingly, looking at, I'm quite a visual person, so I was just drawing
Mhm.
little bubbles, stuff, not in a linear way because it goes all over the place. But I remember, sort of meeting you, Michelle, in March, just after I had certified out of that quite long, well, it's
Yeah,
expensive,
18 months.
extensive qualification that I did. And and thinking, oh, what now? Literally,
Mhm.
what now? Because whilst you're training, obviously you're focusing on learning different things. The theory was amazing, and also the practice in coaching people. Um, and then you graduate, and then you think, well, how am I going to run this business? Because ultimately, yes, you're a coach, yes, you're qualified as a sexologist, but also you are a business owner. So
Mhm.
this kind of transformation, because I've always, sort of had a voice, but on behalf of someone else, like the
Yeah.
UN or other employers that I was working for. So this was also a transformation, for me this year, and kind of shifting gears and taking ownership of my business, and
Mhm.
and really sort of, looking at how I'm going to make money as well, sort of
Yeah.
out of all of this. And meeting you was transformative in that sense, and
Oh,
I've been so lucky to work with you, and I can't wait to work together in 2025 again, because what you do so well, Michelle, and I'm sure people will sort of say that to you, but you give the space, so for people to actually grow, but in a very practical way. You're able to guide them and mentor them, and that's exactly what I needed. So it has
oh,
been a fantastic year as a result of having the right people around me, and you're one of them for sure. Other collaborators, and really kind of creating this new ecosystem for me to kind of explore and grow with. So yeah,
mhm.
it's been amazing, absolutely.
Oh, it's been so wonderful to watch, honestly. It's almost like you've just got your wings and
Yeah.
yeah, it's great. So if I could say to you, obviously on the back of this year's success, what would be the big goal for you? What do you hope things look like
Yeah.
for you in the future?
So I definitely want to, if we think about those three buckets, I really want to kind of dial up and down a little bit on both. I mean, ideally, I'd do everything at once, but I know,
Yeah.
so that's not always possible, to clone ourselves, sadly, or, probably it's a better thing. Otherwise, we'll all be burnt out. But having kind of established, the credibility and the focus on my private practice, which is kind of flourishing,
Yeah.
which is brilliant, and it gives me so much pleasure to be able to help women one to one. I really want to kind of shift gears on the corporate wellness thing, aspects of
Mhm.
my work. I think that's really going to be the big, push for 2025,
Mhm.
especially because that's my old ecosystem, or the ecosystem that
Yeah.
I used to work with. I want to kind of go and really sort of, make those bridges. So that's
Mhm.
going to be the big focus. Also speaking opportunities a lot more, out there, using my voice, and on the various topics that we've discussed earlier, and maybe a book. Thinking about that as
Oh,
well.
amazing.
Yeah, inspired by other people, who are also writing their own books. So cheers to that.
Oh, that would be incredible. So what is coming like immediately next for you? So what can we expect kind of at the start of 2025? Are you going
Yeah.
straight in for the corporates?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's going to be, I'm just working at the moment on a training program for, so there's a lunch and learn, lunch and learn, which can be like a one-off session,
Yeah.
brilliant introduction. But what I want to do is an actual training program. In fact, I used to work when I worked at Barclays. I was heading sustainability there, and one particular program to train people around what sustainability was about. So something
Okay.
very similar, inspired by that. It was called the Barclays Lens. So obviously not going to steal the name, although it did come, from my team at the time. But something similar where I provide training for leaders in the space, even if they're not. I'm not talking about just HR leaders here. I'm talking across the organizations, because I think
Yeah.
everyone needs to know in a similar way that sustainability was and is about everyone taking ownership of it. Same thing for so not feeling guilty about it, responsible, sort of, or having kind of the pressure, but actually taking
Yeah.
ownership of those topics. So that's what I'm going to focus on.
Amazing. And also an idea just came to me actually then was because of the success that you have had in this role, which is relatively, to me, it's quite a pioneering thing to do that you're doing because not many people do that. I wonder whether you could kind of even in the future set up your own academy to train other women to be pioneers like you are.
Yeah, I would absolutely love that. So, I mean, that would be amazing to do that, especially because I think training is the way forward in terms of, building capability for people to then go and own it and own their story and tell it differently, because it doesn't have to be just one voice. That's the whole idea of
Mhm.
having a movement. It needs to be about, sort of many different voices. So yeah, what a great idea.
Definitely. World domination next, I
Yeah,
feel.
100%.
So Marie, how can people find out more about you? Where can they go to?
Yeah, super simple, one entry. I've got a website where everything is out there, and hopefully summarized in a way that's kind of accessible, including the press.
Mhm.
So it's mariemorice.co.uk. That's pretty straightforward. And then
Brilliant.
on Instagram, it's Marie Morice _sexologist. So that's where to
Okey-doke.
find me. And go and look on Instagram, because I'm constantly shadow banned. So that's
Oh.
the joy of, you know, working on the S word. You get it's okay with the F word, but with the S word, somehow, you know, it's not. It's the algorithm don't like it. So yeah,
Okay.
that's where to find me.
Okay. Well, what I'll do is I'll put the links below in the show notes, and so people can find you. But as
Thank you.
always, Marie, it's been an absolute joy.
Well, likewise, and thanks so much for having me and for working with me this year, and I can't wait for next year.
Amazing, me too. Thank you, Marie.
Thank you. Thanks, Michelle.
Bye.
Bye.